Hey folks, Jeff Salzman here. Welcome to the Daily Evolver on Tuesday, October 10th, 2017. I need to mute that. And today I want to, just look at some of the headlines, and especially as it relates to what I see and feel is sort of the worm turning once again on Trump as the systems of a modern government, that is a government where power is distributed, is not just resisting, but actively opposing this most pre-modern and indeed pre-traditional president. We've sort of had a series of bad realizations about Donald Trump. I think everybody, including most of his supporters, realize that he's a crude bully. And for, his core supporters, they like that about him. And then the next level of concern is there anything that's actionable legally about this? Did he or did he not collude with the Russians to throw the election, and a number of other charges that Mueller and his team are investigating, and that beat goes on. But there feels like there's a new arising of the questioning of his fitness for office. And not just among liberals, we've known it from day one, but among the mainstream, and particularly mainstream Republicans. And just how dangerous it is to have somebody who's unfit in that office of the presidency of the United States. And of course, all of this is really brought into focus by the interview that Senator Bob Corker did, Senate Republican, very conservative, one of Trump's earliest supporters in the Senate. Bob Corker from Tennessee, Republican, and his interview with the New York Times on Sunday, where he said that he thought Trump's, as he put it, reckless threats towards other countries could set the nation on the path to World War III. And that's a big language. That's not just, a resistance. That's an active opposition. And he also said that aside from a few, all the other senators agree. And I think it's very significant. In fact, as significant as Corker's comment itself is the fact that these senators haven't really objected to that characterization. They haven't denied it. In fact, they've, from McConnell to Lamar Alexander and a bunch of the sort of mainstream Republicans have put out statements about how Bob Corker is a very fine senator, very fine man of the highest integrity, all of that good stuff. Very little defense of Trump, no defense of Trump. Even Pence, I thought, Vice President Pence, issued a statement that where he defended Trump by saying there's no amount of criticism at home can diminish Trump's accomplishments on the international stage. But I think it was important and notable that Pence did not name or denounce Corker, even though, of course, Trump was denouncing him in tweets, nonstop. And this, as I said, represents a mainstreaming of a view long held by liberals. We liberals, and it's interesting to sort of feel these stages of development, these world spaces that we exist in. I mean, liberals have a visceral repulsion to Trump. We can't believe he's there. All our alarms go off, all our sensors beep and blink. And I love, one of my favorite characterizations by an unabashed liberal is from Richard Cohen, and this was from his column that he wrote on the occasion of Trump's inauguration as president of the United States back in January. And he wrote in the Washington Post, "Donald Trump is a one-man basket of deplorables. He's a braggart and a liar. He's a bully and a demagogue. He's an ignoramus, a deadbeat, and a chiseler. He is either a sincere racist or an insincere one." And I love this last sentence. "And his love for himself is matched only by my loathing of him." Isn't that great? And we see this, we see that mainstreaming into the moderate middle. Morning Joe at this point, the show on NBC, 3-hour show every morning, starring Joe Scarborough, who used to be a Republican, still considers himself a conservative. But on his show with Mika Brzezinski, it is just an operating assumption of virtually all of the guests that Trump is unfit, and they use that word, for office. They resist labeling him a psychopath or a sociopath or anything like that. And they say, we're not going to do that, but he is unfit, and that's the word they use. Politico had an article, I guess yesterday, on how his staff constantly tries to manage and contain him, distract him. Corker talked about that. And you get the sense that the Senate is getting a sense of its real responsibility here, and that there's actually not just, kind of disappointment that this guy isn't presidential and the sort of discouragement that comes from the fact that nothing's getting done and their agenda is not getting pursued, but it's moved to real fear, that this guy could careen out of control and, in Corker's words, take us to World War III. That's, sobering. And, it's from an integral perspective, from an evolutionary perspective, it's fun, interesting, encouraging to see this machine of the modern government, like white blood cells, begin to surround this guy. And, one of the key realizations of modernity out of traditionalism is that power needs to be divested from the big guy, from the warlord, from the king or queen, the sovereign, and distributed from one person into this system that is actually designed to fight, where power is distributed among bodies that can metabolize the natural contentions and conflicts of human beings. And this is, we're always like, why are they fighting, and why can't they get along, and why can't they get anything done, and all of that good stuff. And the truth is, although, there is increased polarization, which from an evolutionary perspective is also a stage of the path. That's another topic for another day. But let's just suffice it to say that the system is supposed to fight, and that the Senate is supposed to resist. It is a co-equal branch of government in the House with the president that is supposed to resist his worst, always he so far, his worst impulses. And, people criticize Corker as only saying this because he's quitting. And he's resigning from the Senate after this term. And I'm sure that's true in part, but I wonder why he's quitting. And is he quitting because he's running or thinking of running against Trump to take away the nomination in 2000, whatever it is, 16, if he's not gone sooner? And that would be a plausible way for a moderate Republican to go, because even amongst Trump's supporters, and I think of a couple of my relatives back home, we were just visiting there, and they're both Trump supporters. And the guy, my uncle, is all about, Trump is, go get him, yeah, bomb throwing, and, punch those liberals in the nose. And his wife is more like, I know he's a pig, and he turns my stomach, and I can't believe he's there, but maybe he'll get something good done, and at any rate, he's not Hillary Clinton. So, there you have it, that sort of, that bomb throwing versus Main Street Republicans. And the Main Street Republicans are movable here. And they, if they want the system to be healthy. They don't want to dismantle the system willy-nilly or recklessly. And so there is a lane for a Republican who gets out in front And it's interesting, Corker is an interesting choice because he was one of the first Republican senators to support Trump. And so he actually even has credibility, if he plays it right, among the sort of people, the people who are, you know, the most dyed-in-the-wool Trump supporters. So anyway, as we move to this new standard, not of did he do something illegal, which is, you know, the high crimes and misdemeanors, the impeachment, that's a long process, it's very political. We move to this, this standard of unfitness, which brings in a new constitutional remedy, the 25th Amendment of the Constitution, which says that the vice president, together with the majority of the principal officers of the executive departments, that is, the vice president with the majority of the cabinet members, cabinet heads, can remove the president for being unable to discharge the powers and duties of his office. And that may be where we would go with this in terms of a removal in advance of 2016. Now that's, again, a long process because it has to be voted on in the Senate and there'd be a whole legal thing and, you know, lawyers would come on both sides and so forth. But in the meantime, there's another sort of de facto remedy that I see already happening. It's not removal for the high crimes or the unfitness, but it is just basically the marginalization of Trump, the selectively ignoring him, where, you know, apparently he'll sign any law. So, you know, if they could actually pass one, you know, he wouldn't be a problem. And, you know, the government can kind of run, as the far right often says, the government's sort of run by the deep state anyway. And there's truth to that. That's what, you know, their word for the bureaucracy that just keeps grinding along. But the rub, the real problem is that we have this military chain of command and that the executive, the president, is the commander-in-chief, the top of the chain of command. And that the chain of military command is not designed for checks and balances. It's designed for speed. And I don't know if any of you saw it, but there was a segment on 60 Minutes not long ago where the head of the nuclear, nuclear arm of the military, who would actually carry out the order of the president to launch nukes, says that it's basically a 4-minute process from when the president orders it to when the nukes fly. And so that's, of course, a big worry. But, you know, countering that is sort of a realization that also comes online with modernity, is that the chain of command, first of all, is not a suicide pact. So, you know, reason has to intervene here. And that realization that really dawned, this idea of when to disobey the chain of command, the idea of war crimes in general, started arising, at least in the United States history, after the Civil War and after World War I and so forth, and was really codified after World War II in Nuremberg, where it was declared illegal to execute crimes against peace or wars of aggression. And that was actually a charge that was leveled against Bush in Iraq. But also crimes against humanity. And that these crimes are considered to apply to all leaders, organizers, instigators, and accomplices involved in planning and committing these crimes. And so we have to hope, certainly, and I think have some confidence that whether it's Mattis, General Mattis, the Secretary of Defense, or General Kelly, the Chief of Staff, or good old Rex Tillerson at the State Department, who called, I guess there's some debate about what he called Trump. Was it a moron or a fucking moron? I heard that argued both ways. But that these guys are not going to go down in history as abetting a nuclear conflagration. They're not even going along with the transgendered ban. And they're, again, it's sort of distracting Trump with the shiny object and studying it until he forgets about it. And it's also hard to get, even if Mattis is replaced or, it's hard to get the whole chain of command to go along with crimes against humanity. I mean, one of the things that dictators in developing countries, you see it happening in Venezuela, that Maduro can't quite get the military and the police forces to oppress the people in the way that he'd like. He has his own militias who do some of the violence. And that's typical of this sort of hybrid of tyranny versus some semblance of democracy, and in various countries where the autocrat will have his own private army. But here in a stable democracy, you won't get the army to fire on its own citizens. Now, the one example of that, you might say exception to that happened in America, of course, was Kent State back in, I believe, 1968, where the National Guard fired on demonstrators at Kent State University and killed several of them, wounded several of them. And it's in a sense the exception that proves the rule, because there was such an outcry among people, middle-class people who sent their kids to college, and yeah, they went a little crazy and they were demonstrating and throwing shit, but they got shot and killed. And that was an existential nose rub into, the responsibilities of modern military. And, I think we can, again, certainly hope for that, hopefully count on that. But while that covers us, it doesn't necessarily cover the other people. And I think of, the special dangers of North Korea, where you have this hermetically sealed, the Hermit Kingdom. And anytime you get an individual or a group of people who become immune to feedback, hermetically sealed, there's a natural tendency to go crazy in that kind of a container. And I can't say that I was reassured at all by an article in the New York Times on Sunday from Carol Giacomo, who is a New York Times reporter who just came back from North Korea. And she said, after 4 days in North Korea, I am not at all sure that this standoff will end well. It was unsettling to hear ordinary North Koreans talk of war with calm acceptance and by their government's propaganda happy talk about certain victory over the United States. So that's where it starts getting scary. That's where it has, I think, permeated the skin of even the mainstream Republicans, of which there are many. And again, I'm noticing a ratcheting up in that consciousness that is just what the founding fathers intended. And let's remember that the founding father, Donald Trump, would not be a surprising or new character to the founding fathers. He was precisely who they were thinking about when they wrote the Constitution. So let's hope it continues to work. So there we go. I think that'll do it for today. And what fun. I want to thank Integral Life for producing this. And Corey DeVos, thank you so much for producing this. I want to throw a plug in for the What Now conference coming up in, when is it, Corey?
It's at the end of the year. It begins on December 29th, I think. I don't have it right in front of me. I believe it's the 29th until January 1st. So it's a New Year's celebration and an opportunity for the community to come together and sort of tend to each other and lick our wounds and figure out what our next play is going to be.
Yeah. And I'll be there, and Corey will be there, and Ken Wilber will be there, and it'll be a good time. So I encourage you to do that. And I also encourage you to become a member of Integral Life. I'm not getting anything for this, but these are a group of really good people who are putting out the best stuff in the Integral community and really providing a center container for this movement. And I really encourage you to become a member and support them. So any thoughts on all of this, Corey?
Oh, man. Yeah, I've got a few thoughts. I mean, now we go to the section of the show called Talk Corey Off of the Ledge. Rescue Corey from his own cynicism. No, I think you made a really, really great point earlier, Jeff, about how, it's not easy to change a system, right? You can't turn a battleship on a dime, and that's sort of what the American government is. There's certain safeguards built in to prevent too much change from happening too quickly. Unfortunately, I think Trump's been sort of, bashing his head against some of those barriers. And that's true of any, it's sort of, in the one sense, it's like, thank God for social autopoiesis, right? A system wants to maintain its integrity. And, there's these bands of resistance that any autopoietic system is going to have, whether it's the stock market or the human organism. And, the nature of disruption itself is when some force unexpectedly is able to break through each of those sort of concentric circles of disruptive bands. And I think that's sort of where we are today. And, the cynic in me tells me that, Corker coming out the way he did, it's a little bit funny to me that it's the Republicans who are leaving office or who have already left office who are able to be openly critical of President Trump. So to me, it's hard to take that any other way than the GOP is sort of stuck between its base and a hard place, and they're floating trial balloons right now because it's, there's a sort of Faustian bargain that they're presented with right now, where it's either we support Trump and try to maintain that cohesion of our party, or we denounce Trump and really seriously damage our own party. And a lot of cynical folks on the left are a little bit frustrated with the apparent party before country politics that a lot of these guys seem to be playing. I mean, we know that the Republican, institution itself did not like Trump. I mean, Republican media Republican leaders did not give him good press. I mean, right. There was a ton of resistance building up to the election, and then he won. And it's, again, it's this sort of cynical. I remember Grover Norquist saying, all we need is a guy, with basically a pen and a functional hand. Right? We just need to give him the legislation, have him sign it, and that's all we really need. And I think the Republicans are beginning to tune in that Trump is making their platform very unappealing just by association.
Yeah.
And so I think they're getting a little bit desperate right now in terms of where, what direction do we go in? Do we begin to sort of, be honest about Donald Trump, or are we going to continue playing this game?
Or are we going to continue to represent our constituents?
Yeah. Yeah.
I mean, that is actually a factor. I mean, there's a certain malpractice for a politician to not represent his or her constituents. And when you have 80% of your voters, or 70, supporting Trump, yes, there's at some point there's a calling that is beyond that. And that's what I'm sensing. That's what I'm talking about here. There's a sort of a fear that this guy actually will hurt things, that is arising, that I think is not just in some of the more courageous, or in the case of Corker, nothing to lose politicians, but is also something that is arising in the breast of a lot of so-called Trump supporters, who would be movable if there was a leader who would come in and say, okay, I actually get, I was one of the first supporters of Trump. I get that you are just upset with the system in general. And I get where they are too. If you go back to where I grew up and see these cities that are hollowed out, I don't care whether it's Hillary or Mitch McConnell. They don't want anybody
Right.
who is going to be supporting that system. They're not overthinking it. They just want it to change.
That's right.
And not just the system, the economic, but also this oppressive political correctness that they are, they feel, pardon the expression, marginalized by.
Yeah. Yeah. Well, and in a lot of ways they are. I mean, the liberals in a lot of ways left their own base of working class white people behind, left them in the dust for the sake of the identity politic game. And, hopefully they're learning their lessons, over on their side of the aisle.
Yeah. Well, we can figure this out ongoing.
That's right. That's
Get
right.
this all straightened out.
A quick question submitted into our Q&A from Penny, which I'll just read aloud.
Okay.
You've got a quick answer. And of course, if you don't, we can always circle back to it tomorrow. Penny asks, Jeff, can you describe more about the process that Congress could go through to remove Trump from office for the reason of being unfit? Is there any way for us as citizens to support this process getting started? It seems like perhaps from what you shared that Congress may be getting ready to do this. Thoughts? Now, my understanding is that this needs to be initiated by Vice President Pence. Is that correct?
Yeah. And of course, we all know he has no motive.
Yeah.
Do you think that he would really mind if he were president?
Right.
Do you think that he really think it's a good idea for Donald Trump to be president? I don't.
Right.
I mean, he's being, he's doing what a vice president has to do, which is support, Trump. But I do think, again, it was very significant that he didn't denounce Corker.
Right.
And he's trying to play this middle ground. So I think that could happen. I do. I mean, right now, Trump hasn't done anything other than just be, kind of a bull in a china shop and, not get anything done and offend people and screw things up. But he hasn't really put the country in a clear existential danger with, war or something like that. I do think that he would be willing to.
Yeah.
Trump has that, we talked about it last week, that sort of psychopathic personality where he doesn't have a lot of sensors for danger. He actually doesn't mind chaos. He actually thinks it's fruitful, and for him it has been. Mm-hmm. But he also likes praise, and typically, historically, when a president does a act of foreign aggression, their popularity goes up briefly, often, but it goes up. And Trump doesn't care about long term. Mm-hmm. He's a short term thinker. Mm-hmm. So, there is a real danger. Again, I hope we can trust the chain of command to have a modernist, view that would resist his impulsive hostility.
Yeah.
But in terms of what can we do, talk about it. Thoughts are things. Have conversations. Think about it. Write to your Congress people. Let them know that you really want that. Yep. They do pay attention to that.
They really do.
If there's a demonstration or that sort of thing, those are all sort of conventional means of activism. Yeah. But they're what we've got.
Yeah, and Jeff, it's such a critical point. It absolutely does work. If I can give my own just very, very brief story of some of the advocacy we did, around the repeal of the Affordable Care Act. So, Angie and I obviously our family would be deeply affected by that repeal. So it puts us into that existential space. And, so we did what good Americans should do when they feel threatened by their leaders. We contacted our leaders. And here in Colorado, we called our two senators, Cory Gardner and Michael Bennet. Cory Gardner, we never got through. I think I left one really enraged message with his assistant. Now, the important thing is, I joke about being enraged. The important thing is, even when you disagree, and perhaps especially when you disagree, you really do have to be civil when you're calling these people. It's the only way that they're actually going to count your call and not just disregard it as trolling. So you really do have to be civil, but be strong in your advocacy. And then we called Michael Bennet. And I didn't talk to Michael Bennet, Senator Bennet directly, but I did talk to his assistant a few times because I made several calls. And a few months back, Democratic senators, and I think representatives, mostly senators, did a protest on the steps of the Capitol building. And we saw pictures of the protest. Michael Bennet was holding a giant poster board of Evelyn, of my daughter, in Washington, D.C. on the steps of Congress. I tell you, I've never felt more represented. I mean, directly represented.
There you go.
Now, I've had my issues with Benny. He's sort of a milquetoast Democrat and, all of this. But the fact that my family was able to do some advocacy, and then I was literally able to see my daughter's picture being held by my senator in protest of taking away, the Affordable Care Act and all the, access to good health care that it has brought to our family was just amazing. So it absolutely does work. Call your representatives, call them regularly, be civil, be kind, and be strong.
Wow. Well, that's a great answer. Thank you. I learned something today here. Yeah, that's good testimonial.
Well, thank you, Jeff.
Yeah, thank you guys. And we will be back here tomorrow. All right. Thanks, folks.